Tonight we are in Perth on the banks of the River Tay. Once Scotland's capital, it's now one of our fastest growing cities. At the start of the year, the area was ranked as having the highest potential for business growth in the whole of the UK. But what matters most to the people who live here? Tonight, voters from across the political spectrum have joined us to have their say. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the show where the people get to ask the big questions, answering them on our panel this evening. Liz Smith is the Scottish Conservative MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife and the party spokesperson on social security. Liz was elected to Holyrood in 2007 and announced last week that she's standing down at next year's election. Also with us tonight, musician and writer Pat Kane, fresh from a 40th anniversary tour with his band Hue and Cry. Away from music, Pat's been campaigning for independence since the 80s. He was on the board of Yes Scotland and has a weekly column in the national newspaper. Pat recently launched a new political initiative called Spring. From the SNP, Jim Fairlie is the MSP for Perthshire South and Kinrossshire and Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity. Jim's lived and worked in this area all his life, becoming a shepherd, then a hill sheep farmer. He went on to build a successful food and events business and founded Scotland's first farmers' market almost 30 years ago. Also with us tonight, the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats and the party spokesperson on health, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Alex is the MSP for Edinburgh Western and became leader of the party 5 years ago. A few months ago, he travelled to the States to campaign for Kamala Harris. And finally, Scottish Labour MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife and the party spokesperson on transport, Claire Baker. Claire has been an MSP for this area for almost 20 years and is also the current chair of the Scottish Labour group at Holyrood. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our audience here in Perth. It's great to have you with us and to be back with you again. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland tonight. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media. And our podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Stuart Patterson. Good evening, Stuart.
Good evening. Are Donald Trump and JD Vance just playground bullies?
Thank you, Stuart. Unprecedented scenes in the White House on Friday when the President and Vice President clashed with Ukrainian President Zelensky over the future of that country. Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I think that what we all saw on Friday night is one of the most appalling things I've ever seen on live TV. We saw a premeditated, attempted humiliation of one of the bravest people on the planet. And that was followed up by JD Vance just saying yesterday that countries like Britain and France haven't fought a war for 40 years, despite hundreds of our service personnel dying in the field for the defence of America and American values. But that is nothing to the removal overnight on Monday of all military aid from America to Ukraine and latterly intelligence to Ukraine as well. I think we're witnessing the unravelling of the Western alliance in real time. That alliance, let's remember how that started. It started 85 years ago, in the words of Winston Churchill, who said in the House of Commons that he hoped in God's good time the new world would come to the rescue of the old. He was talking about World War II. But that started a security relationship we've depended on for all those decades.
Alex, you said sometimes you need to tap a friend on the shoulder and say, wait a minute. How do you do that with Donald Trump?
Well, this is where I actually think the state visit has to be kept on the table. As distasteful as Donald Trump is to me, and I'm sure to many people in this room, for some reason, he has a particular affection with our royal family. He talks about playing cards. Well, we have a king in our hand, and it's a king that Donald Trump desperately wants. And I think when you've got any kind of leverage, in these days of crisis, you don't throw that away. And let me finish with it by saying this, Stephen. I mentioned those words of Winston Churchill. In the same speech, he said that Britain would ride out the storm of war that was coming and outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone. Well, right now, the fighting men and women of Ukraine have ridden that storm of war for years, but they are not alone. Our parliament and this country stands with them. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
Jim Fairlie?
I think what we need right now is calm heads, cool thinking, and a measured discussion. But I absolutely take all the points that Alec is making. What happened on Friday night was deplorable. We have got a man who has led his country through 3 years of bitter conflict that was inflicted upon them. Let's remember it was Russia who invaded Ukraine.
You say deplorable, but the question is it bullying?
Doesn't matter what it is. The effect that it has had has meant that the world has gone into a spin. And doesn't matter what the behaviour is. It's what the result of that behaviour is. It has been, it was deplorable behaviour. But what we need to do now is take a breath and think, how are we going to get to the point where we get this conflict ended, where we get Russia to withdraw where they should be, and how the world regains a bit of equilibrium. Because right now we are completely out of kilter. And I don't think that Trump's going to be a difficult person to handle. I was listening to Scaramucci that Trump sacked in the last...
Anthony Scaramucci.
Yeah,
yes.
Anthony Scaramucci. And he said, Trump's going to hurt you if you stand beside him. Doesn't matter who you are. Because his ego and his desire for money are the two most important things that he has. But that doesn't mean to say that we cannot use whatever influence we have to have that conversation, to remind them that there are very real global issues that he is adding fuel to, and then we need to try and pull that back.
Liz Smith, his supporters would say, forget about the words, let's look at about where we are with this, and we're talking about peace for the first time in 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but you can't forget about the words. The rhetoric that was used on Friday on television was completely and utterly unacceptable. And since that time, we have seen, and I think it is bullying to answer your question, we have seen Donald Trump try every which way to undermine the issues in Ukraine and to undermine a leader who, in my opinion, has done the most fantastic job over the last 3 years. And that, to me, is the most unacceptable aspect of all of this. It is, Jim Fairlie's right, it is a time for very cool heads. I would keep the visit to His Majesty the King on. That may be repugnant to some people because of who Donald Trump is, but if you were to stop that visit, then I think that you would have greater trouble. I think the King, with his soft diplomacy, just as his late mother before him, can do an awful lot to try to appease the situation. And at the end of the day, like him or not, Donald Trump is the democratically elected President of the United States. We have to accept that. And so, and give all credit to Starmer, I think, over these last few days. I think he's been statesmanlike, and I think we all have to remember that we have a job to do to be statesmen and stateswomen and ensure that we can dial down on that offensive rhetoric in whatever way we can.
Thank you. Man in the back row.
I appreciate the state visit might yield some benefit, and I understand what you're saying. However, we've got statements like we'll take over Canada, and the head of state invites a bully, effectively, to entertain. Is that not a bit contradicting kind of what we're standing for?
It's very difficult because not only is he talking about Canada and the trade war, he's also trying to take over Greenland, and there's all kinds of tensions around the Eastern European countries as well. We've got to remember that. But I think we have to try every single clause that we have to try to ensure that we can get peace. That's what matters at the end of the day, that we get peace for the Ukraine.
Can I just add to that, though? Peace absolutely matters. Everyone in this room wants peace, but it has to be peace on Ukraine's terms. It can't be a forced peace, a capitulation by Ukraine, because we know from 2014, from 2008, that Putin will say that he'll freeze the lines of contact, but then he'll come back in 5 years' time when he's rearmed for more. We cannot allow that to happen.
Okay, let me go back to Stuart, who asked the question. What do you think, Stuart?
Giving Donald Trump a state visit is pandering to a bully. It's just massaging his ego, and that's no way to deal with the man.
Thank you. Man in the front row here. Yes.
I mean, I completely agree it's a time for cool heads, but could we be redirecting the question to, is this not a time for great British sensibility? You know, like, let's take some leadership here. We've already got Starmer, who, you know, and I haven't voted for Starmer previously, but I was really impressed at how he is backing European allies who we previously turned our backs on, and is trying to unite Europe with Macron to make sensible decisions around defence, around diplomacy. I feel like a state visit throws in the face of that, personally. Would it not be best to be focusing on strengthening our ties with allies as, I guess, you know, Western hegemony is unravelling right on live TV?
So look east rather than west at the moment to America. Pat Kane?
I think the thing that bothers me most about this is the sort of spectacle of two autocrats, two authoritarians bossing someone else around, and the effect that that has on us as citizens.
Was it bullying?
It certainly was bullying, and I mean, if you did a psychohistory I don't know about Zelensky, but certainly the other two autocrats, terrible fathers, terrible family situations, a very poor display of male leadership qualities. But I'm more worried about what it does to us. It paralyses us, it depresses us. That's partly their intent, flood the zone with crap, as Bannon originally said. And so that's my anxiety, is that this is a disempowering spectacle, and we have to find the Democrat in us all the time to kind of fight back against it, because I think it is deliberately disempowering. It's a display of raw, naked power that's supposed to make us all intimidated.
And is it easier to do that, Pat, with Donald Trump here, on a state visit, where we can look him in the eye on this?
I'm afraid I'm of the Janie Gordley school of Trump critique, and I'll leave that with the audience.
Lady on the end up here.
I think coming back to the aspect of bullying, and I agree, there's an anxiety that's now growing that as much as this might be a discussion about Zelensky and Trump, we are seeing him going after the tariffs, and we're seeing him making statements about taking over, you know, different places. And I think even sitting here, there is an anxiety building of that bullying mentality.
Yeah, totally.
So when and who can say no? Because when it's a bully, we've been taught we need to stand up to bullies. But how do we do this? We've got the statesmanship, and there's a way, there's a process. Okay. But it's really quite frightening because who's going to stand in his way just now? OK, who's going to stand in his way? Claire Baker.
And we're living through very stressful, unpredictable, worrying times. I mean, I grew up during the 1980s when the Cold War was on, and I remember at that time, when you were a teenager, you did have a degree of fear about what was going to happen next. And the current generation, I think, are now experiencing that. And things happen so quickly. So last week on debate night, you weren't talking about this, but everything happened on Friday and then trade wars started with Canada, and then there's talk of Greenland and all this. I mean, he's an unpredictable character, and he's trying to disrupt world order, and he's trying to make things difficult. And I think that's his style of politics. But it's a style of politics. And America is still one of the UK's allies. And the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, did go to America. When things happened on Friday night, Keir Starmer was the person who was able to speak to Trump on the phone and Zelensky on the phone, and is trying hard to bridge that and bring us toward an area where we could start delivering a peace deal.
Trying hard, but you can't stop him, can you? You can't stop him.
Well, he was democratically elected. We do have to accept that. We do have to find a way to work with him. That is for the UK's security and for the UK's economy, and that's the two areas that Keir Starmer went to speak to him about. And the work that Keir Starmer has done, bringing European leaders to the UK over the weekend to put a clear message about the need for peace for Ukraine and the basis on which that should be delivered, that Ukraine still has security behind it and we recognise its sovereignty. Now, I'm not denying it's difficult and that there's still a way to go. I realise that Zelensky did write to Trump, I think, in the last 24 hours, trying to seek a way forward on this. And I think we do need calm heads and we need to keep an eye on the prize and just keep trying to move forward. But it's a difficult time ahead of us.
Keir Starmer has been very statesmanlike in what he has done, and I absolutely applaud how he has managed this process, because it's been very, very difficult. And I would rather the state visit didn't happen, but if it's going to, you've got to use that as the pressure point to try and put influence on him. But Claire's point is he was elected by 74 million American people. They put him there. Yep. So you cannot deny his democratic right to be the President of the United States. But I think what that does is it gives every one of us in politics a lesson that people are disgruntled right now, and we need to change how we're approaching the problems that we face as a country and as countries across Europe and across the world. Because if people are that disengaged, that they have voted in that way,
Yep.
then we've got a lesson to take out of that, and we need to start really listening to why people are doing that.
Yeah, briefly, Alex.
Well, it's clear, it's absolutely clear that Donald Trump has signalled that he's now in the market to build a bridge to Russia and to other states that would harm us. And that is mind-bending. If you consider where we were just a week ago, you know, the idea that NATO was keeping us safe was sacrosanct. I mean, Article 5 and the Western Alliance, as we described it. I think just finally going back to the state visit, one thing I think that's been missed quite extensively is the fact that there's actually 2 visits, that the King, when he wrote to Donald Trump, invited him to an initial visit to Balmoral to plan the state visit. That's incredibly shrewd because first of all, it allows a double hit at that soft power diplomacy, but it gives us a natural break clause. It doesn't mean that if everything fails at the state visit, it was a disaster. We've still got that leverage. So I think, you know, I agree with the entire panel here. Cool heads have to prevail. I hate Trump with every fibre of my being, but I recognise the power he holds in this dynamic. And for the fighting men and women of Ukraine, we owe it to them to try and keep him in the war.
OK. From soft power, let's move on to hard power with our second question of the night, which comes from Tom Rhodes. Tom, good evening.
Due to world events, should we close Faslane?
Thank you, Tom. At the weekend, the Prime Minister described the SNP's long-standing opposition to nuclear weapons as wrong-headed and something that should be reconsidered. Jim Fairlie.
I think what we need right now is an increase in our spending on defence. I think that's accepted right across the board, that we, as European nations, need to increase our spending on defence.
What about deterrence, the nuclear deterrent?
If we're going to spend money on defence, is spending money on nuclear weapons to the tens of billions that cost at the expense of us putting conventional weapons on the ground. Because it hasn't been nuclear weapons that have protected Ukrainians. It has been fighting men and women with conventional hardware at their disposal, and they're the ones who have kept the Russians at bay.
Well, Ukraine gave their nuclear weapons up, so we don't know what the situation might have been.
Well, no, and that, because you don't know, but what we do know is this, that the Ukrainian men and women have fought with conventional weapons and they have kept the Russians at bay. Bear in mind, Russia said this conflict would be over in 3 days, 4 days. Well, we're over 3 years in. And because the Ukrainians have had the ability to defend themselves, because of the efforts of America and European countries that we have been part of, we've helped to arm them to repel that invasion.
But there have been hundreds of thousands killed in that. Would Russia have invaded Ukraine if Ukraine had kept its nuclear deterrent?
If you're trying to get me to get into the mindset of Vladimir Putin, Stephen, I'm afraid I can't help you. Because Vladimir Putin is about as unpredictable as the other side of the water on that one. But what I do know is this. We've got nuclear weapons there right now, and it didn't stop Russia invading a neighbouring country. And we need to put that spending into conventional weapons so that these countries can actually protect themselves on the ground.
OK, gentlemen on the end here. Yeah.
Well, given we're not sure about the nuclear shield we're going to have from America in the very near future, I suppose my big concern with spending on conventional weapons is we let Vladimir Putin bully the rest of us into not letting Ukraine win this war in the first place. Should we have spent more on those weapons? Should we have given them more in the first place?
Liz Smith.
Well, first of all, we should definitely keep Faslane. If we were to shut Faslane, the person who would enjoy that most is Vladimir Putin. No two ways about that.
Doesn't it make us more of a target, though, Liz?
Yeah. I don't accept that. I think the deterrent principle is absolutely right. I think that has had proven ability to keep the peace over time. But to answer the other gentleman's question, when it comes to what we should be doing on conventional weapons, I think we have to accept that we are going to have an increase in our defence spending. I was recently on a visit with the Finance Committee at Holyrood to Estonia, and they have got a hypothecated tax of 2% on everybody in Estonia because of the concern that there is the border, obviously, with Russia. And Starmer has said that we will have to go for 2.5% in this country. I think we have to accept that. Do we want to have to do that? Of course, nobody wants a more dangerous world, but we have to accept the reality of the situation that we're in just now. And I think one of the biggest dangers that we have in the world at the moment, not just what's happening between America and Russia and Ukraine, but also all the tensions that are around the world as a result of these very belligerent nations trying to dominate. And sadly, we have to defend ourselves against that.
Okay, let me hear from the audience. Man in the blue sweater. Yes.
It's not a case that both America and Russia have far, far more nuclear deterrent than we have. It's also disturbing that our test firing in the recent past was a mitigated disaster when it failed.
Thank you. And down here too. Yeah, on you go.
You mentioned that it's a nuclear deterrent that has stopped Vladimir Putin invading. There are many countries throughout Europe who don't have nuclear weapons, and he hasn't invaded any of them.
Pat Kane, does the deterrent work?
It doesn't work. I was listening to a Labour advisor called Paul Mason, who was recommending that the Starmer government prepare itself for tactical field nuclear weapons as a response to the Russian threat. This is madness. This is insanity. You know, if anybody looks at the history of nuclear weapons, at least in this country, at least for the 20th century and the 21st, the amount of times we have been that far away from total global annihilation sometimes by the virtue of a responsible underling at the bottom of the chain of command is far too often for my comfort.
Is this the time,
now we're
Pat,
in
this dangerous time?
It's not. How can something that annihilates all life on the planet be a deterrent of any kind? It's absolutely ludicrous. And this vector of tactical battlefield nuclear weapons, I was supposed to be getting ourselves into some kind of mentality that we can contain, you know, the impact of a tactically applied nuclear weapon. It's a species of madness which we're gripped, and which I've always been a proud, independent, supporting nationalist, because that's the number one thing you do with your sovereignty is to denuclearise the country.
Liz says that's
for the sake of global peace.
Liz says it's just playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin.
I think it is.
Playing into the hand. I mean, Vladimir. Another thing about this as well is we overestimate the strength of. They thought it was going to be 3 days. It turned out to be 3 years. They're not as strong as they look economically. Any of the experts will tell you that they're at the point of collapse. So I don't think we should over-demonise the power of Vladimir Putin to kind of come over the North Sea and land in Aberdeen. I think it's overly done, and I think if we kind of tiptoe into a very, very disastrous circumstance, a hair-trigger circumstance where anything could happen.
I think you have to ask the Estonians or the Latvians, the Lithuanians, the Romanians exactly how they feel about the Russian aggression that is on their borders. And, you know, that sometimes doesn't come across very well in the British press, because obviously we're looking at it from our own perspective and how we deal with our allies in Europe and America. But speaking to people in these nations, I think they are desperately concerned about the ability that Putin could have to invade some of their territory.
But they were buffer states in an earlier period. Finland in particular, I know quite a lot of Finns who were part of Partnership for Peace, as it was called. But we need to get back to thinking about the Russian interest and what is their requirement to have NATO on their doorstep. I don't think so.
And
think about that again.
The other point about the point that we just made there, Liz, is it just emphasises the point that Ukraine needs to win. Because if the other buffer states are around about Russia and Russia gets defeated by Ukraine, they're not going to be as likely to go and try somebody else. So it's all of our imperative. It's European security that the Ukrainians are fighting for. And we need to make sure that they win that ground war.
Claire Baker, you moved on this, Claire, haven't you? Because you were against the renewal of Trident. You're one of these people that have changed their position on it in the light of recent events.
I mean, I think, you know, I talked about growing up in the 80s. We can go back to that time where we had a nuclear race that was happening. I'd say in the last, 10 years, there was talk of international reduction in nuclear warheads and countries working together to reduce, but I just don't think that's where we are at the moment. And I think Liz talked about being in Estonia. I was at the Nordic Council on behalf of the Scottish Parliament with the Nordic countries, and the biggest issue they had to talk about was security. Finland has the border with Russia, and they are concerned about their security. They're concerned about the threat that comes from Russia. It was the biggest issue that people had to talk about. And we are part of NATO, and NATO does serve a purpose. I recognise there's questions about the future of NATO at the moment, mainly because of discussions that are coming from America, but we are part of NATO, and it's a nuclear alliance. And I think we need to, at this point in our history, retain the capacity that we have.
It's a huge cost, the 31 billion to replace Trident. Is it value for money?
No.
Well, I know there's an active debate around that, but as I've said already, I think at this point in time, it's a reality that we have to live with, and I think we have to remain part of NATO.
Sorry, I interrupted you, I do apologise. If that 31 billion was then put into conventional weapons, how would that then allow
I suppose the future of any kind of conflict is quite unclear, and we need to be ready on all fronts. And we want to, as Pat has said, using nuclear weapons is, I mean, it's just catastrophic. It's nothing that a country should be considering doing, and so I can understand why people argue why should we have them. But if it acts as a deterrent and it acts as a strength for us as a country alongside conventional
Alex, I'll come
military.
to you in a second. I just want to hear from the audience and this lady in the front row. Yes.
If Putin was going to use nuclear weapons, he would have used them already. He's not going to use them. He knows it's stupid. He's not a stupid man, obviously. But what I think Trump did on Friday was just totally divert attention away from Gaza. He's wanting Gaza. He's wanting the mineral rights and stuff, the oil field that's just been discovered in the sea in front of Gaza. He's wanting that. He said himself he's going to make it into a resort. That's wrong. In Ukraine, how they recruit people is they grab them off the street. Why is that right? Why is no one mentioning that?
Okay.
I don't understand.
Okay. Gentleman with the glasses at the back, yeah. And you.
Is the reality not with nuclear weapons, though, that, yes, it's a deterrent, but if one is used, is that not just the world gone? We can't... If one is used, then we fire one back, the world's gone.
Yeah.
No negotiation, right?
It's not a military decision to use, it's a political decision, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I think that's right. I mean, targets, you talked about whether Scotland would be a target or not. In the world of the thermonuclear warheads, there are no targets. Everyone dies. Everyone dies. That's what happens. I have spent all of my life campaigning against nuclear weapons, and as a Quaker, since being a young Quaker, I've been campaigning for this. But I think the word you used is timing, Stephen. I think that's exactly right. I want to rid the world of all nuclear weapons, and I think that means using our stockpile to bring others to the table and reducing things that way. But this also ties into the previous discussion about America and how trustworthy an ally they are right now. There's a massive anxiety people are not talking about because obviously a lot of it's classified, but it's a matter of public record that our Trident submarines go to a US naval base in Georgia, America, for servicing and having their missiles and launch platforms serviced, because they're the only guys who have proprietary knowledge of the tech or the engineering skills to be able to do it. This is, just how insane this world is right now, that we're having to rapidly backfill the procedures we would do for servicing our nuclear deterrent or many of our other military tech. For me right now, the priority has to be Ukraine, and Jim is absolutely right. Ukraine needs to win. We had a Ukrainian guest living with us for 9 months. We would send care packages to her cousin, Sasha, who was in the Eastern Front, fighting in Bakhmut. And Bakhmut, if you remember, was one of the most badly destroyed, badly fought over towns with the Wagner group. He was the only surviving member of his entire battalion at the age of 23. He survived, but he is utterly ruined, physically and mentally. The Ukrainians are exhausted. They are on their knees, but they're also on the verge of a massive breakthrough because Russia can't keep this going for long. We need to focus our full might and refocus America to arming Ukraine to the teeth so they can
end
end
the nuclear
this
deterrent is
conflict
part of that full might that you talk about?
Well, no. I mean, I think that's a discussion for another day. You couldn't release that money to fund Ukraine overnight. We're talking about huge, tens of billions of pounds invested. I want to see the world free of nuclear weapons, but that's about bringing others to the table and having that discussion in a rational place. We are not in a rational global place at the moment.
There's a lot of foreign aid that could be restored with the Trident money. I think in terms of soft power, in terms of reducing tension in the world, that would be a much better experience.
Okay, all right. We've spent half the programme already on this. There's other things to talk about here tonight. Your views from home, we'd love to hear from you. Hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We are in Perth tonight. Next week, we're going to be in Cumbernauld. The week after that, we're going to be in Galashiels. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for either of those shows, just go to the website and click on the link, and it'd be great to see you there. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Brenda Fraser. Good evening, Brenda.
Hello.
What can be done to tackle the issue of abusive behaviour towards teachers in our schools?
Thank you, Brenda. The UK's largest teaching union, the NASUWT, has said the national plan devised by the Scottish Government to tackle violence and abuse is having little impact, they say. In fact, the number of physical assaults has gone up in the last 12 months. Liz Smith, what can we do about this?
I think it's a very serious issue. It's growing in our schools, as all the evidence has shown. I think there are various causes of this. Principally, I think that head teachers in our schools are not given sufficient autonomy to be able to deal with it themselves, that they're always having to go with some plan that's issued by a local authority or by a Scottish Government, well-meaning, but nonetheless, they don't have the facility to deal with it in the way that is best for their school. And I think that's a real problem. I think a lot of teachers feel that as a result of that, they're not really supported in trying to address this issue. I think we have to do much more to engage a lot of our pupils who are, for one reason or another, not getting on at school in the way that we would like and expect.
Your leader, Russell Finlay, suggested today maybe we'll lower the school leaving age to 14 to encourage children at that stage to go into apprenticeships or college education at that stage. Is that the answer to this?
Well, I think it's part of the answer, because what I'd like to see in the school system is much greater flexibility. And actually, all the political parties represented here tonight at one stage or another have been talking about greater flexibility within the school structure. And if you look at the countries in Europe that are doing most successfully when it comes to attainment and aspiration, a lot of them have very flexible structures. So what Russell Finlay is proposing, along with the rest of us in the Conservative Party, is that at the age of 14 and 15, you should have a greater choice of what you do with your education, because I don't think we're doing enough to ensure that young people, and there's good in every single young person in a school, every single one of them, we're not doing enough to ensure that we're allowing that child to flourish. If that means going into a proper apprenticeship that is linked to business and industry, and I was interested today when Russell announced his plans that it was business and industry that were talking favourably about that plan. If it means with more flexibility in the college system, I think we should be doing that as well. But the behavioural issue, what we're really trying to instil in young people is self-discipline. And that's the most important thing. You've got to get self-discipline. I say this as a former teacher. You have to ensure that young people feel motivated and that they feel that they are going to be well supported. And I think teachers need to feel that as well.
OK, we've got young people in the audience tonight and teachers. I'd love to hear from you. And this lady in the white top. Yeah.
Does the violence is starting at a much younger age than 14, though? Is it not a sign of the decimation of social care, of wraparound care for families that are struggling, for children that are struggling? Yeah. That's really the cause of violence in schools.
Yeah, that's what the survey certainly shows. Jim Fairlie, why is this happening?
Well, there's I'm going to have to. This is not an excuse. COVID changed the way young people started to live and work amongst each other. And I think there is still a holdover that from the COVID period that children weren't integrating. Now, I'm not a teacher, I'm not in the education sector, and the lady may well tell me this was happening before then, and I'd be happy to hear your response to that. But the behaviour in schools, something has definitely changed, because the levels of violence that the lady had talked about that asked the question, it was never something I experienced as a young person. So what I'd really like to understand is why young people feel that this is okay, why young people feel the need to express themselves in these ways.
And the teaching union says your plan for sorting this out just ain't working.
Well, I've spoken to Jenny Gilruth very recently about this, and she says we're putting in a number of measures. It's not going to change overnight, but we're putting in a number of measures to try to get to the root cause of it. I don't think having kids leave school at the age of 14 is the answer. If they're struggling to regulate themselves, then we want to make sure that they are fully developed as much as they can be.
Let me finish. Sorry.
is to let them actually develop in the school so that they've got that ability to be able to make rational decisions. And at 14 years old, I barely knew what day of the week it was at 14 years old, let alone ask me to then. If they said to me at 14, because I hated school, so if you said to me at 14, you know, you've got the choice to leave now, and yes, there is this proposition that you have to go into a destination. Who's going to check to make sure that I am still in that destination 2 months after I've left the school?
But Jim, one of the issues that we've got just now is that 15% of our young people are leaving Scottish schools without any qualifications. And there are so many other aspects of qualifications that young people can gain. I mean, it's not that long ago since we had the introduction of Newlands Junior College for young people who were very disengaged, and that happened between 2014 and up to 2019. That was a huge success because Jim McCall knew exactly what it was to train up very young people, because he gave them a purpose in life that they weren't getting at school. I would like to see far more aspects of that.
Okay, when you talk about that disengagement in school, I absolutely recognise it, because I was one of those kids. But if I had been given the opportunity to do things differently within the school confines, which is what Curriculum for Excellence was supposed to be about, and it's still got things to deliver, there's no doubt about it. But I've been to a number of schools in this constituency, and every one of them have said the same thing. Without Curriculum for Excellence, I could not have given these young people these experiences,
right, but
particularly
that's not the
the ones
about. The question's about behaviour, Jim. Let me bring it back to this man in the front row.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're talking about qualifications and we're talking about school retention. I'm going to speak as a young person who worked their way through high school, got a first-class honours degree from an elite university. CAMHS is bursting at the seams. Kids are leaving school with no emotional regulation skills. Why are we doing a decade of online safety for digital natives who are children, who probably know your parental controls better than their parents do? Granted, it's needed, but why are we doing the same repeated personal social education lessons when we could be instilling CBT skills? We could be instilling emotional regulation skills from the jump. Why are we neglecting that and focusing on things like qualifications, trades? There's kids leaving school don't know what a tax code is. There's kids leaving school don't know what to do when they have anxiety. Why are we not teaching these skills so that kids have the skills to live life rather than just survive it?
Thank you. Lady up here.
Exactly, following on in respect of the sort of CAMHS comment, I feel like education at the minute are being asked to pick up. You know, the waiting lists are so full in the tariff of how you get access to a service. Meanwhile, the trauma continues for that young person, for the family around them. It is about looking at services and what's available, because it just, you know, it's an effect that then just clogs up the adult mental health services, and they hope they grow out of the services. We've got young people just now who cannot regulate, whether that's COVID, whether that's parental substance misuse, parental offending, whatever the sort of context of that is. Teachers are being asked at a basic level to start teaching regulation while they're also trying to teach basic maths. There is a huge gap in it, and CAMHS can't facilitate it, and it's sort of a, well, you know, resources are full, so it is what it is.
Okay, thank you. These teachers say 80% of them have experienced assaults in the last 12 months. Pat Kane, what do we do about this?
Can I slightly answer that a different way? There's disruptive pupils and there's disruptive pupils. Now, was it 2 or 3 years ago, we were all celebrating Greta Thunberg sitting outside of our school protesting against the environment. That started up the Fridays for the Future movement, where kids walked out of school. Heaven forfend. Why were they doing it? Because they felt as if there was no future in their future.
That's not what these teachers are complaining about. It's physical assaults in schools.
I think you have to be a wee bit psychosomatic about this, which is to say, since COVID, and we don't know the physical effects that have actually happened to people in terms of their ability to regulate their emotions, and COVID, there's quite a lot there. But also, the teachers I've been reading about today say austerity is a huge factor. Kids are stressed out. Their parents are stressed out because they're not thriving. They don't feel secure in the world that they're in. That's eventually going to percolate, and I feel they have to be like this combination of occupational therapist, teacher, social worker, psychotherapist, life coach. It's too much to bring to the classroom. But I think we need to go down deeper as to what's causing the distress amongst these kids.
Well, let's try and hear from people in the audience who may have some clues on this. Man with the beard here, yes, in the jacket. Thank you.
It's sounding like prevention is better than cure at the moment with what you're saying, because Jim, you were saying like kids today are starting to do this. You never did it back in your day. Surely the focus should be on where is this coming from, rather than, you know, it's kind of like trying to shut the door after the horse is bolted. And yes, that is going to be a generation of young people who are going to need to be helped going forward. But surely we should be getting on with the next generation coming through the doors to say, right, let's, like what everyone's been saying, focus on teaching children how to deal with their emotions and how to act in public. And, you know, assaulting teachers just isn't acceptable.
I think that Pat's just hit a really good point.
I want to bring clarity on this, because Labour have said that they'll have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to violence in schools. What does that actually mean, and how do you do that?
I mean, one of the things we've said we'll do is you can't have mobile phones in classrooms. And we know that young people sometimes will carry out activities, if it's attacks on other pupils, or then film it. Part of the thrill of it is being able to film it. So you take that out of the equation. When the figures came out this week about abuse and violence against teachers, and I know that from speaking to teachers, that since the pandemic this has become a bigger issue. Lindsay Patterson, who's an expert in education in Scotland, said that England and Wales did invest in young people after the pandemic. They recognised there was an issue to put more resources into school to deal with this, and said the Scottish Government didn't make the same response. During the pandemic, I asked for an equality assessment to be carried out to recognise the impact the pandemic has had on young people. So that's, you know, I think we need to recognise the cause of it, and there needed to be greater focus on young people's mental health and well-being.
But listen, the question is what you're going to do about it. What does zero tolerance
Well, coming back to, I think
mean?
Liz talked about empowering head teachers, and listen this week to head teachers speaking on the radio. I think Col Kay did a phone-in about it. It was teachers who had head teachers had the confidence of their staff. Their staff knew they would be believed, they would be trusted, and that there was consequences for pupils who were misbehaving.
So, I mean, excluding more pupils?
And I don't think it necessarily means excluding them completely from school. What they talked about was putting them in different spaces within school, so they were still expected to learn. They also said, though, that there was a shortage of resources in school, so they couldn't do it anymore. There wasn't a teacher available to sit with these pupils, but said that was an effective way of doing it. I think you do have to remove some pupils from a difficult situation, but we need to, try and limit exclusions. Excluding young people from schools isn't going to solve the problem. Keeping them in education is part of the solution, and that's why I don't agree with the Conservatives' proposal that you leave school at 14 to go on to either apprenticeships or whatever. I think you need to see more involvement within school that gives different options for people, and you need a clear path into employability and into the workplace.
OK, all right, we've got parents, we've got teachers in the audience as well. Lady in the front row here.
Just as a parent, I see my 7-year-old watching a lot of media from various outlets, and he says to me, why, after Friday's issue in the Oval Office, why is it then that we welcome this man to our country? And I can see that there's no censorship of media, and there is like a media circus. So the anxiety is already built in someone who is just 7.
Thank you. Thank you. And man down here.
Yeah. I'm very interested in the Labour politicians' comments on schools when they're quite happy for ideological reasons to put the tax on private schools and disrupt 7% of our children's education, those who can't afford to stay there. That's OK, isn't it?
Claire
Do you want me to respond on private schools? I support what we've done on private schools. We haven't seen the exodus of pupils moving into state school that was predicted. That's a policy that I do support. And the money that goes into that goes to support the broader education.
Is it ring-fenced? It's not ring-fenced.
Let me just bring this back to the first question. I don't want to lose sight of what we're talking about here tonight, which is violence in schools. Alex Cole-Hamilton, how do we deal with this? The teachers' unions say the policy at the moment is not working.
Well, it's not just schools, Stephen. It's shop workers, it's transportation workers, all reporting increased levels of assaults.
So society has changed.
Well, this isn't normal. It's not normal behaviour for kids. And kids are not born bad. No kid is born bad. This is definitely part of the long shadow of lockdown. A diminishing of resources in the school sector with and parents not being able to help kids to regulate themselves. But it's also a removal of youth work as well. There's far less youth work, detached and sessional youth work in our society. Nobody gets to kids who are struggling better than a youth worker. They can form positive, lasting adult relationships with somebody who's not their parent, not their teacher.
What's going to be in your manifesto about this next year?
Well, a guaranteed entitlement to youth work for a start, Stephen. But I wanted to come back to a number of points that have been made, and I think very well, about the unmet need. And we talk about the kids who are acting up in school. Well, there's thousands of kids out of school who are not engaging with education at the moment. Again, in part as a product of lockdown, but also unmet need in CAMHS, in child and adolescent mental health, but also in undiagnosed, or they're in one of the longest waiting lists on the planet for ADHD assessment. In Edinburgh right now, if you present and ask for an ADHD diagnosis, you are told you are going to have to wait 7 years for that diagnosis to come through. And that's before you even get to a titration clinic that's going to get your meds and your levels sorted out. This is a national outrage, and these are our kids. These are our kids. We are throwing away a generation of kids who are toiling under the trauma still from lockdown, who were failed in large part during that period. Let's not fail them again.
Yeah, 40% of children in Scotland now have additional support needs. And the Audit Scotland said the Scottish Government have not provided for that in our schools, Jim.
So the gentleman up here talked earlier on about we're actually talking about prevention rather than cure. And Pat touched on some of the social issues. Alex just done the same thing, talking about some of the social issues, because it's not just in schools, it is across society. So what is it that has changed? What is it that has allowed us to get to this stage where these kinds of behaviours are becoming the norm, and they shouldn't be? But it goes back to where are people's... where are they in their head that this is okay? Why are they not able to give their kids that kind of early learning? Why is it that we've got parents that have got kids that are going to school who are still not potty trained? There are things going on that, quite honestly, I don't understand at this moment in time, but we've got to find out what it is that's causing it, because if we can prevent those things, then we can change what's happening. Now, I fully accept that we have got problems. The lady up there talked about CAMHS referrals. For the first time, the Scottish Government has actually hit the CAMHS targets in the last, very recently, I can't remember what the dates are, but they've hit their CAMHS targets for kids to be seen within a 12-week period. There's a lot of kids...
backlog. It's taken a long time to get to this stage.
I know it's taken a long time, but we're making progress in that area. And as I said right at the start of my answer, this is difficult, this is hard. And we are making the hold on a wee second. We're making the progress in small stages, and I accept that that's not good enough, but it's as hard as we can go at this moment in time. But we've got to get to the point where kids aren't going in with that inability to regulate, that kids don't see this as normal.
OK, so Jim says we're making progress in child and adolescent mental health services. We'll get there.
Well, tell that to the families who come to see me, who come to see Jim every week, who are waiting, being told to wait for years. We're getting better at meeting the waiting time target in CAMHS, because CAMHS is becoming a gatekeeper. Yes, they're seen within 12 weeks, but they are then referred to a waiting list of several years, whether that's for autism, for ADHD, whether it's talking therapy. If they're looking.
Do you have any idea why we have so many kids right now that are dealing with these issues, Alec? Because I certainly don't. Well, no, so what is the answer? Where is the answer from yourself? If you're accusing us of something, where is the answer?
Solution. If you let me give you an answer. Okay. You know, first and foremost, we've rehearsed quite a number of the reasons why this is happening, and COVID is in part of it, but it's also a recognition that there is so much unmet need. There's been a global shortage of ADHD medication, which is priming mental health crises in young people who haven't been able to get access to their meds, who aren't in the queue for their meds because the titration clinics in our health boards have been closed because of the global shortage. These are problems that we can solve through policy and investment that your government just hasn't done.
You think outdoor education is a big part of this?
Well, absolutely. I hope to get a bill through the Parliament very shortly on outdoor education, because one of the things that really upsets me a lot is that there are many youngsters in Scotland who never get any chance of residential outdoor education, and that's something that is proven not just in Scotland, but right across the board, to be very beneficial to building resilience, self-esteem, confidence, and to ensure that young people recognise what it's like to be, that they can get things out of themselves that they never thought they could be able to do. And I think that's very important on education. But just one point on the additional support for learning. In fact, one of the reasons why we've actually got more youngsters who qualify in that bracket is actually because the diagnosis is better. So that's a good thing. But part of the issue with, and you can speak to any teacher in any school, part of the problem with additional support for learning just now is it's often getting confused with bad behaviour. And they're two separate things. And too often, the very disruptive pupils in a classroom are allowed to stay in that classroom and disrupt the other pupils and disrupt the teacher, and that's why we have some of the behavioural issues. And I think we have to look sometimes at the principle of mainstreaming. It sounds absolutely the right thing to do. We want to be inclusive in the way that we promote education, but sometimes there are some youngsters who cannot cope in a mainstream classroom, and there are too many of them who are in these classrooms just now, and they're disrupting education for other people.
This is a no, hang on a second, Alex. I want to hear from the audience. This is a 20-year presumption in favour of mainstream education. Lady down here.
My concern, a bit like what Liz has just said, is that while you've got 40% of the kids in the school with additional support needs, you've also got 60% who don't. And I feel that at the moment, some of the kids are getting pulled back because they're not getting the opportunity to learn the way they should be learning, because the teachers and the support staff are so busy dealing with the kids who have got additional needs. We also do have some issues as well where some of the kids that are bad behaviour is they're being removed from the classroom to take them away from the rest of the class, which is fine. But they're being taken away and they're getting to go and do things like play football outside. So the other kids are seeing the kids that have been taken away for being bad outside playing football, which they're thinking, well, actually, I'd quite like to go outside and play football. They see that as a reward. They don't see that as being a punishment.
Okay, thank you. Man at the back.
I think there's a couple of reasons, and it's been discussed, you know, throughout the show tonight. But clearly, schools are underfunded, and that root cause is austerity, has been mentioned. The fact that's glossed over, and we descend into political fights about policy and investment, all these things. The reality is that's impacted the fabric of whole society, and then we get into CAMHS and all these other areas. My two kids have been on the CAMHS waiting list for 6 years now. They've been waiting at least 3. They've still got another 6 years. You know, you can't get back time. That impact on them is gone. So we forget about a political affiliation or what might be good. And
do you mind me asking what's been the impact on them of that wait, a 6-year wait?
Missing school, confidence, like what's been mentioned, there's effective reward. And ironically, I feel it goes back to why we pander to people like Trump. Yes, there's an element where we have to deal with him, but why do we encourage and reward by being scared to stand up to him? You know, and try not to ramble here, but there's a CAMHS consultant that we saw that said they're retiring, and then, you know, a couple months later, we're still seeing them because they've come back as a consultant. Now, the actual choice to do that is not an undue me, that's an individual choice. But the fact that the system is so broken that even they feel the pressure, the teachers feel the pressure, that's a reflection of how broken society is. And it doesn't mean we forget about and give up, but I think it's a recognition that, you know, one, we must do better, and two, it's the kids and the impact, and it will never get better if we focus on targets. Yes, things need measured, but it's the impact on people, it's the lives. You know, the unmet need is a great way to reference it, but we're talking about people's lives, and they will forever act out or have negative impacts on other people, and it'll perpetuate.
It's family lives right now, and futures too. Man here, yes.
Hi, would you agree that there's too much red tape put on the teachers and head teachers, and also lack of consequences for kids for their behavior? That's basically my opinion. Being a father of 4, I can tell you.
Oh, well, we bow to your superior knowledge.
Yeah, well, there you go. I've got experience on panel of ages, so that's exactly what it is. It's lack of consequences at school, and teacher being tied up with regulations, being worried not being sued or shouted at by parents and so forth. So there's lots of going on on both sides.
Support. Yeah, Alex Hamilton.
Support for teachers is absolutely vital, as is clarity as to what effective discipline looks like. But so too, I think, is a skill we don't often teach our teachers in training, and that is to teach from a trauma-informed perspective. I mean, sometimes bad behaviour is a totally normal response to abnormal circumstances. And now there is great trauma focused teaching and teacher training going on out there, but we can always do more. And we, I think, across public services need to understand, particularly in Scotland's 12,000 looked after children, all of whom are battling every single day against trauma, attachment
But teachers don't go into education to end up being assaulted.
No,
and 80% of them are necessarily happy.
And forgive me, Stephen, we've moved on slightly from the original question there, and I agree with you, and I think that we've talked about possible solutions, that youth work interventions are absolutely key to that. So too are clearing down the waits for CAMHS and ADHD diagnosis. But having a more trauma-informed society, I think generally would be a good thing for understanding and dealing with that.
I really disagree. A more trauma-informed society would be a good idea. When you look at the amount of wealth that's generated by informational capitalism at the moment, and you would think that actually to reduce the working week or to bring in a universal basic income, or both, which would give human beings, parents, families, the time to look after each other, gets at the fundamental question. With the 40% of kids being under some kind of psychological or mental duress requiring care in school populations, it's a new stat to me.
But why do you disagree with being trauma-informed on that?
Because I think the trauma, the trauma of modern life, the trauma of competitive consumerist existence, the trauma of being completely addicted to machines that psychologically
all I'm asking
frazzle
is that the people who work with you
look at the trauma, you're not looking at the system that causes the trauma.
Let me hear from the audience. Lady in the white top.
Yeah, I think to build on that, if we are saying that the bad behaviour really kicked off during COVID, it's no coincidence that that was also when wealth inequality has massively increased. And if we can tax the rich and move wealth through the equality, move wealth through the system, we could fund all of these amazing ideas to improve the lives of our kids.
Thank you. And lady in the front row in the scarf down in the front here. Yeah.
I'd just like to refer back to a comment made by a lady along the road, and something which both the ladies on the panel have mentioned. Just from personal experience, I have a grandchild who was at a senior school in Perthshire, bullied incessantly to the point where she began self-harming. Now, the school did absolutely nothing about it apart from reward the bullies by giving them lovely things to do, leaving them in the class. We as a family then had to make the decision to pull that child out of school and almost bankrupt ourselves as a family to put her to private school, where there is no mobile phones, no bullying, zero tolerance, bullied out. So your 20% increase, lovely, thank you.
Okay. So
it's not everybody at private school.
There are other ways to do things in terms of dealing with problem behaviour. Thank you very much indeed. We're out of time this evening, I'm afraid. Next week, we're going to be in Cumbernauld. Have a look at our website if you want to come along and join us in that show. Gala Shows the week afterwards. If you missed any of tonight's programme, we'll repeat it a bit later on BBC One Scotland or any time that suits you on the iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel tonight and to our audience in Perth and to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.